So for today's movie review, I'll be reviewing the 2019 manga anime adaptation, Alita Battle Angel, which is based on a combination of both the original 9-volume manga Battle Angel Alita, along with a 2-episode OVA called Battle Angel. And the production to this movie has been a long time coming in relation to James Cameron, because supposedly sometime during the early 1990s, Guillermo del Toro, as in the same movie director who would go on to direct Pan's Labyrinth, Pacific Rim, the Ron Perlman Hellboy movies, being the big anime nerd he is, introduced James Cameron to the Battle Angel Alita manga series because he figured Alita would be up his alley, considering that James Cameron produced movies such as The Terminator along with Aliens, which gave birth to two very iconic female characters in the form of both Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley. And James Cameron fell in love with the property to a point where he wanted to make the movie for years. As in, of all the movie projects that James Cameron has worked on, Alita Battle Angel has been in development hell the longest, even more so than Avatar. And the reason as to why it's taken so long for Alita Battle Angel to even get a proper movie adaptation had to do with James Cameron working on different projects at the time. Although between working on movies such as Titanic and Avatar, he did help create a TV show during the early 2000s called Dark Angel, which served as a sort of prototype for Battle Angel Alita. However, as time progressed, and with James Cameron working on several different movies, eventually the movie fell onto Robert Rodriguez's lap, leading Alita Battle Angel into production, finally, with him directing the movie and James Cameron serving as producer, resulting in the movie we're about to talk about today. And with Alita Battle Angel being released in February of 2019, marked the end of an era for 20th Century Fox, given that this was the last movie they released under their banner before the acquisition of the studio being bought by Disney. And upon the movie's theatrical release, critically, it was all over the place, and box office wise, it did fine, which is unfortunate because more people decided to support Captain Marvel 1 month later as opposed to this movie, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. And as far as my relation to Battle Angel Alita is concerned, I do remember reading the actual source material back in the day, but that was a long time ago, and it's been a while since I've read the source material, and I have seen the 2-part OVA Battle Angel. And despite the movie performing fine at the box office, the movie exploded on the home video market to a point where it gained a cult following, to a point that not only have the people decided to check out the original manga series, but people generally do want Alita Battle Angel to get a sequel, which leads us into our question: should Alita Battle Angel get a sequel? As for the plot of the movie, set in the post-apocalyptic future, a cybernetic doctor, while looking for spare parts in a junkyard, comes across the remains of a cyborg whose head and chest are still intact, and decides to take said remains and decides to rebuild her. Sometime later, the cyborg reawakens, only to discover she has no memory of who she is, leading to her and the cybernetic doctor to form a father-daughter relationship. As time progresses, the cyborg, now dubbed Alita, slowly but surely discovers her purpose as she's fighting off a series of cyborg assassins who were sent to kill her, or anyone she considers to be a friend or family member. Can Alita unlock the secrets to her past, or will the sinister forces behind her multiple assassination attempts succeed in their mission? Now, in terms of what I liked about the movie, actually, before I even talk about the movie itself, one of my biggest concerns when I first saw the trailer to this movie were the eyes of Alita, because a lot of manga, or manga, depending on how you pronounce it, artists typically draw their characters with these really big eyes, and anytime their works get adapted from a printed medium to something like a animated or a live action medium, sometimes characters with these big eyes can translate very well within the realm of animation because it's animation, not so much within the realm of live action because it would just look really weird and uncanny. So when that first trailer came out, seeing our main protagonist with these big anime eyes looked really weird, because not only did our main character have these anime eyes, but but she was the only one to do so within those trailers because everyone else looked normal. And this just gives me so many concerns as to why the filmmakers decided to make Alita the way she looked. But as time went on, I did get more accustomed to our main character having these anime eyes in a live action medium. And thank God there is a in-universe explanation as to why she has these eyes and why everyone else looks normal. And on top of that, upon retrospect, I really do applaud the filmmakers for actually making Alita have these big anime eyes from a visual standpoint because it makes her character look more unique compared to everybody else. Not only that, but the filmmakers were able to successfully translate what most people didn't believe was possible and made it possible. And while on the subject of Alita's eyes, fun fact, did you know there was more CGI geometry in just one of Alita's eyes than for the entire character of Gunnm in the Lord of the Rings trilogy? Now, I'm not entirely sure how much CGI geometry was in Gunnm, but if there's more CGI geometry in one of Alita's eyes than the entirety of Gunnm, that's really impressive and really weird to think about. And while on the subject of Alita, one of the best things about the movie is Alita herself, for the simple reason that she is perhaps the most refreshing female-led character we've had in a long time. Because between 2015 up till now, we've been getting a lot more female-led action movies. The problem with most of those movies are that the writing for our main female lead is not particularly the best. For example, Captain Marvel, when you really look at that movie from a writing standpoint for Carol Danvers. Even though Carol Danvers in the Marvel comics is a woman, the writing for her character in the movie is not exactly feminine, to a point that you could honestly have had any male actor play the role of Carol Danvers and it would not have affected the character whatsoever. Because from a writing standpoint, the character is shown to be strong, a really skilled fighter that has no inherent weakness, but the character in question lacks a personality and emotional vulnerability. Now, Diana from the 2017 Wonder Woman movie was a step in the right direction, where here's a character who's not only strong, but they also had a personality, and it was very expressive. But then the last third of the movie occurred in which really screwed over the character in the writing department, which felt like a step forward at first, but then took a step back. With Alita, on the other hand, this is the type of performance that can only be played by a female actress, in that sense where, yes, Alita is not only strong and a skilled fighter, but she has one advantage over someone like Carol Danvers from Captain Marvel. She has personality and emotional vulnerability, something akin to a lot of other female-led action heroes from the likes of Sarah Connor, Ellen Ridley, or even Beatrix Kiddo from Kill Bill. Because, again, they have the skills to kick ass, but they have emotional vulnerability. Then again, James Cameron did produce this movie, and he did set the stage for female-led action movies with characters such as Sarah Connor, along with Ellen Ridley. That is probably why Alita is so refreshing as far as female-led characters is concerned. To get an idea of the type of character Alita is, if I had to compare her to another female character, I honestly put her in the same ballpark as Lilu from The Fifth Element, in that sense where not only do they have the strength and skill to be a skilled fighter, but both of them are very naive and have a childlike personality, making the character in question endearing, to a point that when we do see them fighting someone, we want them to win. And they do show a lot of emotional range from either being very happy, to being sad, to being angry, because unlike a character such as Carol Danvers from Captain Marvel, Alita has emotional vulnerability, making her one of the best female-led characters we've had in a long time. I also think the setting is also refreshing. Not so much the location, but the time of day, because a good chunk of this movie takes place during magic hour. Magic hour, for those of you who don't know, is basically dusk, when the sun is about to set before the night. And I think having a movie set at magic hour makes for some great visuals and provides a very unique atmosphere that you wouldn't see in any other movie. And on top of that, when the movie is set at night, you can can actually see what's going on. Because I noticed a lot lately where anytime you have a movie set at night, you can barely tell what's going on. Or if you can tell what's going on, there's not enough lighting. With this movie, on the other hand, even when it's set at night, it's properly lit to a point that you can see what's going on between characters, or even looking at some minute detail such as a light or a street sign in the background. The night scenes are that well lit. Another aspect of the movie I really liked is the way this movie goes about the amnesia story, because the typical amnesia formula is character wakes up, they have no idea who they are, spend a good chunk of the movie trying to figure out who they were, then all of a sudden something happens and the character gets their memories back and fully understands who they are. With this movie, on the other hand, it goes about the amnesia story differently, in a refreshing way, because yes, the movie does start the amnesia plotline with character wakes up and has no idea who they are. But unlike most amnesia stories, this movie does something different with its amnesia story, in that when we see Alita get into a certain situation, she has memories of her past life, but instead of fully understand who she was back in the day, or even reverting back to her original personality, with this movie, Alita takes the information she learns from these memories and gets a general gist of who she was, and uses that information to apply it to her current situation. And because the amnesia story goes in this direction, I found it to be not only refreshing, but an aspect of the movie that I feel is very underappreciated. Another aspect of the movie I really liked is the combination of the script and filmmaking for this movie, because on pen and paper, this movie should not have worked, for the simple reason that it has a lot of outlandish ideas. Everything from a floating city, really strange looking cyborgs, and having a main character who has really big anime eyes, because live action adaptations of an anime or a manga, much like live action adaptations of video games, more often than not, result in bad movies, for the simple reason that the filmmakers have no idea how to translate the source material, no matter if it's the anime, the manga, or a video game, in making it work within the live action medium. For example, let's take a classic anime such as Cowboy Bebop. Now, on pen and paper, Cowboy Bebop could transition very well within the realm of live action, for the simple reason that the story, the characters, the setting are very tangible to a point that it could translate well from an animated medium to a live action setting. But when we ended up with the Netflix adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, the filmmakers literally took an anime that could have worked within the realm of a live action and somehow screwed up because they didn't fully understand why Cowboy Bebop worked. Not just within the realm of animation, but didn't really understand the story, characters, or the setting as a whole. With Alita Battle Angel, on the other hand, again, much like I mentioned earlier, on pen and paper, Alita Battle Angel should not work within the realm of live action, yet here we are talking about the movie being one of the best examples of a live action adaptation of an anime or manga, because the filmmakers had a clear understanding and love for the source material, making Alita the exception to the rule of live action anime adaptations, which really should not be the case, because Alita should be the rule and not the exception of live action adaptations of an anime. I mean, just look at comic book movies as a whole. Way before Richard Donner ever directed Superman in 1978, a good majority of comic book movies that were produced between the late 1930s up to the early 1970s were bad, because a lot of filmmakers had no idea how to adapt something like a comic book to work within the realm of a live action medium. Then we get Richard Donner, along with several other filmmakers who clearly have a love and understanding for Superman, and found a way to translate a character such as Superman from the comics to work within the realm of live action, resulting in it being the first major comic book movie. And like they say, the rest is history. I mean, if it wasn't for Richard Donner's Superman, we wouldn't be getting the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it. So I am kind of hoping that if there are any more live action adaptations of an anime in the works, I hope they take note from Alita Battle Angel in terms of how to adapt something from a anime or a manga and make it work within the realm of a live-action medium. Another aspect of the movie I really liked is the world building, because in a lot of movies now then, when it comes to world building, there's usually a lot of exposition dialogue that explains too much. With this movie, on the other hand, the movie doesn't explain everything. It gives you just enough information for you to understand what something is, but it doesn't give you all the details. Instead, it allows you to think and piece together certain facets of this world and makes you question how certain things work in a way that's intriguing. For example, the motorball sport. I don't understand all the details of how the game is played, but through the way the movie explained it or showed it, I get what the sport generally is. And speaking of motorball, one of my favorite action scenes within the entire movie is the motorball chase that occurs in the last third, because the actual sport of motorball takes three of my least favorite sports, that being NASCAR, rollerblading, and football, but it mixes them together and adds a robotic and a gladiator type element to it to make something new and unique. I also love the way that particular action scene is shot too, because it's not shot like your typical action sequence, in that you either have cameras either above or below showcasing the action. No, the way the cameras are set up throughout the whole sequence is shot as if you're either on the track or you're someone who's watching a sport such as NASCAR. Another aspect of the movie I really liked are the cyborg designs, because I think out of any science fiction movie I've seen that had robot or cyborg type characters, the type of cyborg designs that are seen within this movie are very unique, because no two are alike, and some of the designs in this movie are so out there that I really don't think there's anything quite like them. And despite some of these cyborgs having very outlandish designs, such as most of the cyborgs we see during the motorball sequence, or even Grishnika, who appears throughout the movie, as ridiculous as their designs are, there is still tangibility to them, because the way they're depicted, they have this sense of scale and mass to them that make them feel alive. And while on the subject of Grishnika, I also do like the fact that even though the filmmakers took a lot of inspiration from the first 4 volumes of the source material, they took very good liberties with how they depicted certain characters. For example, the character Zapan in the manga is a very minor character within the grand scheme of things, to a point where I think he only shows up for a few panels. He's never seen or mentioned again throughout the rest of the manga. Whereas within this movie, he's given a more expanded role, becoming more of a reoccurring minor antagonist who does serve a major purpose throughout the movie. And then you got Grishnika, who actually doesn't technically appear in the source material, but he's clearly inspired by an amalgamation of characters from the source material to create this character who only exists exclusively for the movie. Another aspect of the movie I really liked is the way the movie presents its main villain of Nova. Because even though Nova is the main villain of this movie, for literally more than 95% of the movie, he himself doesn't make a physical appearance. Or when he does, his presence is always felt throughout the movie, no matter if it's characters talking about him, or when Nova himself decides to possess one of his minions and talks through them. I mean, the guy himself doesn't even show up until the last 5 minutes of the movie, which is a very risky thing to do as far as filmmaking is concerned. But at the same time, within the context of the movie, it made a lot of sense to keep him not directly involved with the movie's plot, given that he's essentially the puppet master pulling the strings within the context of the movie. And as for the last aspect of the movie I would like to talk about is the acting. Because I think the acting is really good across the board. And everyone gives a good performance for what is provided necessary for their character. With Rosa Salazar giving a really good performance as Alita. Granted, there is one performance I wasn't a big fan of, which I'll talk about later. But I think another standout performance, to me at least, revolves around the actor Mahershala Ali, if I pronounce that name correctly, for the simple reason that this actor plays not one but 3 different characters throughout the whole movie. One of the characters being one of the hunter warriors who takes part in the motorball sequence in a blink and you will miss it kind of deal. Then of course there's his main role of playing Vector, And why I think his acting for the character of Vector works so well is that he's not only playing the character of Vector, because several points throughout the movie, Vector gets possessed by Nova. And keep in mind, playing a singular character for most actors is not an easy thing to do. But now you have a case where this character is being mind controlled by this other character, which means now he has to act and talk differently as that character, which is not an easy thing to do. So the fact that Muhammad Ali, or whatever his name is able to go back and forth between these two characters through the same body, in my opinion, is very impressive. An aspect of the movie I have mixed feelings on are the moments in time where we see Alita battling a villain. We get glimpses of her past life in terms of who and what she was. And the way the filmmakers cut to said memories is a very creative idea, because what occurs is during some of the more intense moments, the camera would fly right into Alita's eye, which then proceeds to enter the memory, which I think is really cool and a very creative way to enter a flashback of a character's past life. It's just one of those things where the idea looked and sounded better on pen and paper than in practice, because I think there is a way to enter a character's flashback, but I think the thing that really killed me is when the camera flies right into Alita's eyes. Because, first off, the camera is zooming into an object, and the rule of thumb of filmmaking is you don't zoom in on an object. Now, in terms of what I think they should have done in terms of how we transition from the current situation to one of Alita's memories, is handle it in the same vein as the 2011 Zack Snyder movie Sucker Punch, in which we have the camera panning towards the character like their face, and we're focused on their face, and the camera spins around the character and we transition from the current moment to one of the memories, as opposed to having the camera zoom into Alita's eye, which leads into the memory. As it is, anytime these moments do occur throughout the movie, they just look really weird. Now, in terms of what I disliked about the movie, the first problem I have with the movie is honestly a nitpick, because from the source material, from what I do remember, sometime after Alita discovers Ito is a hunter warrior, the two of them get into an argument because Alita wants to become a hunter warrior, with Ito opposing the idea. And as the argument between the two of them reaches a climax, Alita says this line of dialogue, "I am not your doll to play dress up with," or something to that effect. And I just think that was such a really good line of dialogue. And when that moment occurs in the movie, she never said that line of dialogue, which bums me out at first. And then later in the movie, after she retrieves her berserker body, she and Ito get into another argument, and then I sat there thinking, okay, maybe this is the moment where she's gonna say that line of dialogue. The argument passes, and that line of dialogue is never said, which is a shame because, as I said a few moments ago, I think that's a really good line of dialogue, and I think the filmmakers had two opportunities to use said line of dialogue, but wasted said opportunity. Another problem I have with the movie has to do with the pacing in some scenes in terms of how we go from one scene to the next, because there are several points in time that I noticed in which a scene comes to a conclusion, but it doesn't flow well into the next scene. And if I had to give a reason behind it, how certain plot points play out, it feels as if those particular segment scenes, when they do come to a conclusion, never really felt like the end of a scene. It felt more like the end of a chapter than an actual scene itself. Granted, I'm very well aware that the filmmakers adapted several chapters, and that's probably how the chapter ended in some ways. And if this movie was a TV show, I think that would be a great ending to a episode, and then on a cliffhanger. But when you're trying to condense several chapters of a manga into a singular movie, I think the pace in terms of how we get from one scene to the next needs to be a little better in some cases. For example, the moment in which Alita is defeated by Grishnika and gets saved by Ito, Hugo, along with that one hunter warrior with all the cybernetic dogs. When that battle ended, that to me felt like the end of a chapter. But in terms of how we get from that scene to the next, just something about the pacing there just didn't seem right to me. Again, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen at a few points throughout the movie. Another problem I have with the movie, there there is a few plot holes that occur here and there, but one that stood out to me the most occurred before the motorball game occurred with Alita. Because earlier in the movie, when Alita goes to the Kansas bar to meet all the other Hunter Warriors, Zapan gives an introduction to who each member is. Now, fast forward to the motorball sequence, in which all of the players are replaced with the Hunter Warriors, who are about to hunt Alita on the track. Alita does not recognize any of them, which I found to be really odd, given that she was introduced to them earlier in the movie, and should have recognized them the moment she entered the motorball track. Another problem I have with the movie occurs with the CGI, because even though I think the CGI for 3/4 of the movie are really good, I did notice sometime as the movie was reaching its climax that the CGI didn't look as great as it did throughout a majority of the movie. Because whereas you look at the CGI used between the start of the movie up to the moment Alita cuts Zapan's face off, the CGI looks amazing. But after that, the CGI just didn't look as rendered or polished as it was for a majority of the movie. And there are some little mistakes I've noticed here and there throughout the movie. One of them occurring literally near the end of the movie, where Alita is trying her best to save Hugo after being sliced up by the barrier ring on that giant cable. Because in one hand, she's holding onto the sword, which is launched on the side of the cable, and with the other hand, she's holding Hugo, or what's left of him. And the arm that's attached to Hugo is starting to break. And the moment his arm breaks, Alita is still holding onto his hand as his head and torso plummet towards the ground, resulting in his death. We cut back to Alita, who should still be holding what's left of his arm, is suddenly gone, leading it to basically becoming an error in which if you blink, you'll miss it. Another problem I have with the movie, going back to the acting, because as I mentioned before, out of all the performances in this movie, I really didn't think there was a bad performance, with the exception of one. And while this particular actor I didn't think was bad, his performance of the character felt off to me. The actor in question being Keenan Johnson, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who plays the role of Hugo. And while I never found his performance to be bad, the way he plays the character felt very different in that sense of, whereas all the other actors felt like they were all playing characters within the same movie, the acting that Keenan Johnson does for Hugo felt really different, to a point that anytime you see Hugo within the movie, it felt almost as if Hugo came from a Disney Channel original movie from like the early 2000s that somehow ended up in a Robert Rodriguez movie. And as I mentioned before, while I didn't think the performance was bad per se, it just doesn't mix with all the other performances we see throughout the entire movie. And for the final problem that I have with the movie has to do with the ending, for several reasons. Reason number one, sometime after Alita gets Zapan's sword, I feel all the fights that occur within the ending were very anticlimactic, given that the moment she uses that sword and infuses it with some plasma, if I remember correctly, and you see her slicing up all the sentries along with Greshika, it was very one-sided, and there wasn't really any stakes involved with those battles. Reason number two, the way the movie decides to conclude certain characters' journeys within the movie, such as Hugo, on pen and paper, I get what they were trying to do here, but I think its execution could have been a lot better in some shape or form. Especially the moment, as I mentioned earlier, when you have Hugo and Alita on that giant cable, and they're both hanging off the side of the cable after the ring guard sliced up Hugo. I think that moment needed to be more emotional. It just felt like that moment was lacking something. And reason number three, the movie ends, I don't want to say on a cliffhanger, but it ends in a way which predominantly sets up a sequel that we may or may not get. And here's the thing, the movie could end in a way in which you could leave it open-ended for another installment, but in order for that to occur, this movie needed a lot more closure for its story first. Because as the ending sits, there are a few elements within the very end of this movie which set up for the next installment that, like I mentioned earlier, we may or may not get. So, for my final verdict of Alita Battle Angel, the movie is to date one of the best live-action anime adaptations to ever grace the big screen. And it's such a good adaptation to a point that the movie should be the rule of live-action anime adaptations as opposed to being the exception. And as far as movies that are directed by Robert Rodriguez is concerned, my favorite movie from this filmography is From Dusk Till Dawn. But if you were to ask me what objectively is the director's best made movie to date, it would be Alita Battle Angel. That being said, it does have a few problems, especially sometime after the motorball sequence during the last third, in which some of the emotional moments could have been a little better, and the final battle I found to be really anticlimactic. And although it is one of the best anime adaptations out there, there are points in time where you can tell this is where a certain chapter ends, which leads to some very awkward pacing at times. And despite some of the problems I have with the movie, I think these problems can be overlooked because I think the rest of the movie is that well made. So overall, Alita Battle Angel is an underappreciated cult classic that needs more attention. And before I give my final rating, what did everyone else have to say about Alita Battle Angel? So the movie got really mixed reception from critics and audiences alike. And so, for my final rating of Alita Battle Angel, I give it a 4 out of 5. So, do you think Alita Battle Angel deserves a sequel? And see you later.